European Super League, we hardly knew ya. Well, probably. To get more of an actual take on that, we're going to be joined by two of my good friends who actually know something about football. I want to introduce Nando Vila, who is a host of Jacobin Weekends. You can catch them every Saturday at 1 p.m. He's also an anchor for La Liga. And joining us also is Ronan Burtenshaw, coming across the pond. He is the editor of Tribune magazine, repping some gear right now. Can we see the kit?
Nice.
Hell
What's
yeah.
that sporting brand? Was that O'Neill's? I've never even heard of that.
O'Neill's. This is Bohemians. We're going to go into fan ownership of football tonight. So this is one of Ireland's multiple actually fan-owned clubs, but it's oldest and one of its largest. So we'll go into all that.
Nice.
That sounds great. And if you, the audience out there, have any questions for Nando or Ronan, and potentially me, but probably not me because I have very little to contribute tonight, please send them through the comments. Please hit like, please hit subscribe. Before we get going, we have to mention that we're recording this about 40 minutes after we just got the verdict results of the Chauvin trial in the US. Obviously, the police officer Derek Chauvin was on trial for murdering George Floyd. He has been found guilty of all 3 counts. He's been found guilty of third-degree murder. It's a massive relief, I think, for myself and everyone on screen and millions across the country and across the world that justice truly has been served today. Nando, Ronan, if you guys wanted to say anything briefly on that before we move on.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, the feeling I have is, like you said, relief. Also, sadly, surprise. I mean, I think that's just speaks to how stuck our politics are in the United States, that despite the fact that last year saw probably the largest wave of social unrest the United States has seen in 50 years, that I still expected the verdict to be innocent, that for Chauvin to get off, so I'm both relieved and surprised that it went the way it did. But obviously, I can't even begin to imagine just how just throw up your hand, throw your hands up and say, like, what do we even do? Why are we even doing any of this? Had he been found innocent, it would have been just an incredibly bleak moment. I mean, there was just like a video just showing this cop, like, you know what I mean? Like the feeling of impotence and bleakness that would have come from this a verdict that went the other way, just would have been overwhelming for me, and I think for a lot of people in the United States who really had invested a lot in this case, because it just became such a flashpoint that millions and millions of people hit the streets over the past year or so, and to see that it actually may have had an effect shows that, at least in this kind of narrow instance, the work of politics actually does do something. And I think that's a feeling that in the United States, at least, it's been beaten out of us in a way, because politics in the United States, politics happens all the time, but nothing changes. So this is just like one small step.
Yeah, and my immediate feeling is just one of relief, but also empathy for George Floyd's family. I mean, I think obviously in Ireland there's a long history of battles for justice over state violence, but what Corey Bush said earlier on today, I thought was spot on, that real justice would be George Floyd being alive, and that the question now is how to fight to make sure that there is systemic change, that you don't have a symbol that in the long run means very little, that there is no guarantee that these things can't happen again tomorrow, the week after, and so on. It's a good day for everyone who sacrificed and put themselves in the line in the movement over the course of the last year, particularly obviously the heat last summer. But it isn't these things, they can't be release valves either. They have to be moments where successes are consolidated, built upon, move forward, instead of what I imagine a lot of the liberal press over there in the States will say, which is, this is a vindication. It's not a vindication, not at all. It's a disgrace that it happened.
Right. I think everything that the two of you said makes complete sense to me. I couldn't have said it better. And so, we should take this as a a moment of again, relief and see it as a small victory, but again, it's a victory in the context of a situation that is just truly so depraved and horrific, and it speaks to the massive political challenges that we have in front of us to deal with. The mass incarceration, to deal with like the rollback of welfare state programs, of having a society that values human life, that doesn't police poverty. And so there's a long way to go, but I think people should feel that relief tonight, even if just for a moment. On that note, there's another bit of mass politics that we want to get to on the other side of the pond. So I'll let Nando introduce what we're talking about. And again, please hit like and subscribe and share this with your friends, even if you're not into football. So anyways, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, what we're talking about today is the remarkable rise and seemingly fall of the European Super League, the so-called European Super League. Okay, now a lot of people have been asking me questions here in the United States, like, what the hell is going on? What is this? There's a lot of soccer fans in the United States, but there's a lot of new soccer fans in the United States, or football fans, and this really is a story about the way sports are governed. It's really about a story about capitalism, and it's really a story of how our system commodifies everything which we hold precious and dear into dollars and cents. But to make a long story short, what happened was on Sunday night, there was the official announcement in which the 12 of the largest clubs in the world, led by Real Madrid, but also Barcelona, Atletico Madrid in Spain. In the UK, it was Manchester United, Liverpool, Manchester City, Tottenham, Arsenal, and Chelsea. And then in Italy, it was Juventus, AC Milan, and Inter Milan announced that they were breaking away to start their own league. They were calling it the European Super League. And this was to be a closed competition, or mostly closed competition, in which the original founding teams would never leave. They could never be relegated, right? In European soccer, if you do poorly in a league, or you get relegated to the lower division, if you don't do well enough in your league, you don't qualify for European spots, and so on. This would be a closed league, and they would essentially compete side by side with the domestic leagues, meaning if Real Madrid plays in the Spanish league, on Wednesday nights they would play in this European Super League. And what it did was, it was essentially the way I describe it was a sort of Kong versus Godzilla struggle between powerful forces, in which we were pretty much shut out from, like regular fans, regular people. We were shut out from these big, massive fights which have been going on in European soccer for several years now, between the power brokers who dominate the sport. On the one hand, the governing bodies, UEFA and the local federations, and on the other hand, the top clubs, which mostly these days are owned by either billionaire financial interests, in a lot of them in the United States, or Gulf interests and oil interests, whether it's Qatar or Abu Dhabi, and they've been kind of going at it for several years. This rumors of the European Super League have been floating around for several years now. It was one of those things that I think people knew was kind of in the ether, but no one ever really expected it to ever happen. It's kind of, you can't imagine it. It's just it would be such a drastic change. And they went and announced it on Sunday night. The backlash on Monday was I would say almost unanimous, universal, thorough, complete and total backlash from anyone who loves the sport, anyone who plays the sport. I can't think of a single player who supported it. All the players who did speak out against it spoke out against the European Super League. And then today, on Tuesday, it is Tuesday afternoon in Los Angeles, it's Tuesday night in Europe when we're recording this, we started to see rumors that some of the teams were like, yo, this is a bad idea. I might be pulling out. Manchester City was the first club to announce that they were pulling out. Then there were rumors that Chelsea's going to pull out. There's rumors going on right now that actually may break as we're doing this broadcast that all the English teams are going to pull out. So we're seeing this kind of remarkable trajectory, Ronan, of the creation of this European Super League, the announcement of this European Super League, which was essentially the biggest clubs, the richest interests in European football saying, I want my ball and I'm not going to share it with anyone else. And we're going to make all the money and screw you guys. We're going home. And basically fan-led backlash, because that's really what brought this down, especially I would say in England, although the backlash was kind of universal, but I think that in England they were much more susceptible to this kind of thing because the local domestic league culture is so strong there. And we're seeing it fall apart before our very eyes. So I wanted to just get what your initial reaction to this whole remarkable 48 hours has been.
Yeah. I mean, my first feeling when I heard that the European Super League was going to be announced, so there was this leak. It does now seem as if the chairman and the owners of these clubs, in their wisdom, allowed the cat to get out of the bag on this, and that's why they've made such a catastrophic and farcical attempt to launch the league, which has fallen apart within a couple of days. One of the key aspects, obviously, to all of this, if you think about it, was the ability that they had, because of the degree of money at the top of the game, to leverage a huge amount of finance from JP Morgan. And the rumors were anywhere between 3 and 6 billion that was going to be brought in from JP Morgan in order to finance this. And to put it in context, what that would have meant, Bayern Munich, who were not one of the teams who were involved in this, come to that later on, but when they won the Champions League last year, it was about 90 million that they won. The participants in the European Super League were anticipating that they were going to get 350 million in the first year. So that's the kind of additional revenue that we were talking about. And the plans for the European Super League, it's important to point out as well, were very much against the tradition of football. They were franchise plans. The idea was to bring in, at start, 15 clubs, and they were obviously frustrated that a number of bigger clubs didn't join, but 15 clubs who would be permanent members regardless, and then another 5 that could join every year. And those 15 clubs would have this extraordinary wealth available to them year in, year out. And they would be, brought into this tournament not by anything to do really with their success on the pitch, and this is one part of what rankled with people, but by their wealth. So clubs like Arsenal, who are 9th in the Premier League, would be in there despite the fact they haven't qualified for a Champions League in a very long time. Whereas I think 5-time winners, is it, or 6 times Ajax are not. We're not going to be part of the plans. Yeah. Were not invited at all. They were not even part of those other teams in the French and German leagues who were going to be invited in, but said no. So there was a sense to which the whole traditions of the game were being turned on their head. But it is very important to say, in the context of all of this, that this was not an anomaly. It's not something that came out of the blue. It's part of a very long process of the commercialization of the game, and the development of what I think is a kind of football capitalism, and the commercialization in particular of, I mean, I can speak about the English game most because I know it, it's proximate, and I'm living here now, and it really is a story in and of itself. So you've got the development of the Premier League, which was a breakaway league from the Football League in the early 90s, fueled by the money of Rupert Murdoch and Sky, which are still the big players really in the whole Premier League scene, and actually have been leading part of the backlash to this European Super League, partly because they felt, and they were worried, that people like Amazon or Disney were going to become the new broadcasters of this Super League, and their kind of own little capitalist project of the Premier League would be threatened. You had the development of the Champions League, and also the concentration of the Champions League. So whereas the Champions League, the European Cup as it used to be known, was for the champions of each country, and yes, you would occasionally get mismatches, but by and large it was the teams who had won the leagues in all these various different countries. And even as recently as, you know, the 80s and 90s, you were getting teams like Red Star Belgrade and Steaua Bucharest and so on winning the European Cup at the early stage of the Champions League. It rapidly became a league which was concentrated around football's elite clubs based on money. Yeah. And so there was, you know, going to be 4 teams in it from the Premier League one year. Actually, there was 5 because another won it. And similarly from other leagues, whereas champions of various leagues around the continent were they weren't locked out, but they were given these incredible and in some cases impossible hurdles before they were going to be able to get into it, and having to start their seasons incredibly early, go through 2 and 3 knockout rounds before they got in. And of course, the most recent aspect of this, it was the rise of the super clubs, in part fueled by the money that was coming into the game from what are effectively sports washing interests. So Chelsea was one of the first and most important of these in terms of Roman Abramovich, who was, of course, trying to get his money out of Russia, was afraid of what had happened to Khodorkovsky and other oligarchs in Russia, wanted to get some political safeguarding in Britain, and so invests in a football team in Britain to protect himself from Putin. And that's the origins of this kind of modern version of Chelsea. You get the arrival of the Qataris and the Abu Dhabi lot and so forth into football as well. And that is also matched by, you know, big corporate interest buying over historic clubs like Manchester United and Liverpool and Arsenal. In all of those cases, actually, American tycoons and not Russians or Gulf influences. And this has come alongside a hollowing out of the game. It's worth being very clear about, you know, the consequences of this, where you've had ticket prices going through the roof in a way that has gentrified football and driven working class communities who built these clubs out of the stands. The actual changing of the culture in the stands themselves, with clubs not wanting people to stand, you know, with clubs basically wanting to break apart any degree of organized fan culture that would have existed previously in a sterile atmosphere in the grounds of English football, and this globalization, and this is where you know, there is as you said, this is as much a story of capitalism as it is of football. The globalization of the game, but in a very particular way, because football has been a global game for a long time. What I mean by the globalization is the particularly capitalist nature of this, where you've ended up with, you know, fan bases being developed for Premier League teams in countries, actually to the detriment of the game. In the domestic leagues. So, you know, you've had for instance, in Asia and countries like China and Indonesia and India, you've had the development of fan bases for Premier League teams, but very little done to actually improve the nature of football in those countries. And so once again, you've got globalization in the interests of big Western corporations, which actually is not delivering very much in terms of the global South, and at home is producing a knock-on effect which is disastrous, where you've got the English league clubs and grassroots football in constant state of financial crisis. So, you know, next door to Manchester United, you've got clubs like Bolton and Bury, historic clubs, foundations of their communities, going to the wall at the same time as this super profitable corporation. And I think my view of the backlash of to the European Super League is that, yes, it is a story about football, but that it resonates at a much deeper level. People are frustrated at the nature of the economy, which the European Super League has become a symbol of. And Marcelo Bielsa, the Leeds manager, the great Argentine himself from himself from a fantastic tradition, political family of Peronists in Argentina, but also from a really deep Latin American, progressive, in some cases socialist football tradition, made this point after the game against Liverpool last night. He was the first really prominent figure in the game to situate this not as like a football problem, but as a broader one. And he said, the logic of the world at the moment, and football is not outside of this, is that the rich get rich at the expense of the poor, and then they demand more privileges. And he's right. That's the logic of the world, which a lot of people looked at and then saw in something they cared about so much, which was in football. And that produced this visceral kind of eruption, which was the backlash to the European Super League.
This idea of the globalization of the sport, I think, is crucial to understand. I think that it's been so long now that where the European teams or the big European teams are just assumed to be the best teams in the world. That wasn't always the case. I mean, my South American friends always remind me that in the 70s, it wasn't clear whether the best team in Argentina was better than the best team in the UK or the best team in Germany or whatever. Like there was much more global parity, especially in the domestic leagues in South America, where clubs like River Plate or Boca Juniors or in Brazil, some of these great clubs, put together these incredible teams that could have competed with European teams in a head-to-head matchup, which is no longer the case because after the sort of satellite revolution, the globalization of the sport, as you talk about, all the money kind of flowed to the top, flowed to Europe, and really destroyed the domestic leagues in South America. The Super League, and I think people felt this kind of in their bones, was the next step to now to do the same thing that happened to the leagues in Argentina and Brazil, to the leagues in Spain, Italy, Germany, France, and in Europe. It's kind of the, it coming back to the metropole and creating this kind of new super class of teams.
You know what that is like? I mean, this is just, if you want to talk about that, I remember people at the start of the Eurozone crisis, all my friends in Latin America writing to me about how this was like IMF colonial policies coming home for us.
Exactly.
And they were right. This is what I mean. Yeah. This is a story of that matches the development of global capitalism.
Absolutely. And I think that, there's been a lot of talk recently or in recent years about the nefarious influence of the Gulf states and Russian oligarchs kind of coming in and buying these teams. And that's absolutely true that their influence is absolutely nefarious. But a sort of much less discussed phenomenon has been the American interests into European soccer. Americans own Manchester United, Liverpool, I believe Arsenal. They own AS Roma. They own AC Milan. And they were not seen as these kind of, I mean, I guess in the case of of Manchester United, there was significant fan backlash to that. But the sort of overall story has not been as dramatic as the sort of entrance of the petro Gulf states into the sport. But I can't help but think that the presence of the Glazers, owners of an NFL franchise, a closed league in which the teams are essentially a cartel that are squeezing out as much profit as they can from both the fan experience but also the players, that influence is kind of underplayed in the creation of or the attempt to create the Super League, a sort of very similar model to the American way sports are run, in which those teams, like you mentioned, become franchises. And it was not, had this gone through, had this been successful, you could imagine a situation in which maybe not a team like Manchester United, but certainly a team like AC Milan could move. Like the way American sports franchises move all the time. You can imagine a situation in which one of these teams, maybe they were struggling in the European Super League, maybe they were not competing as much as they would, and they moved to Singapore, and now it's AC Singapore.
I saw Vincent mine earlier on, the journalist, making this point. He says, "Well, you're in Los Angeles, right, Nando?"
Yeah.
I mean, like, okay, so the Lakers are in Los Angeles. There are no goddamn lakes in Los Angeles.
No,
that was originally, I think, they were originally from
Minnesota.
Yeah. People can correct me on that. But look, I mean,
the Clippers were also in Buffalo. The Clippers were there. The Clippers were there are no native LA teams. They both came from other parts.
There are lots of things to say about this because I think there has to be responses to sports and culture that are consistent for socialists in many different cultures and places. I mean, one team to give a shout out to in the American sporting scene are the Green Bay Packers up there with the good people of Wisconsin, which is a fan-owned club within the NFL, fan-owned franchise within the NFL, and one of the strongest and with the deepest roots, and for a very good reason. Which is that when you have some degree of ownership, actual ownership, and some degree of control over the direction of the club, well, then, it has a deeper root in your community than if it's simply a franchise making profit for some, culture capitalist, sports capitalist, that can be moved around to any given location. It's not perfect. It's not in all of these situations you can point to flaws. But I tell you, if I was in the States, I'd be much happier being a Packers fan than any of the other franchises, knowing that tomorrow all of the memories that I had built up with my parents, my grandparents, and all of these things could just be chucked in the bin, and the franchise that I support could be moved off to some other place overnight. So, I mean, I think the franchise model is a model which stands against our traditions, the class traditions of sport, and also socialist traditions and understandings of sport. And we got to talk about some of the differences between when we talk about England and English football, right? A difference between a club and a franchise, right? So, like Woolwich Arsenal, they were founded by workers in a munitions factory who put together a football team in the late 1800s. Man City, they were founded out of a church organization set up for workers' improvement in the community that they're from in West Gorton in Manchester. Manchester United, in 1909, the players of the league went on strike. They were led by Manchester United, by the first real superstar of the game, Billy Meredith. They went on strike for better wages and better conditions, and Meredith took on what he called the little shopkeepers of the FA, who were denying working class footballers a decent standard of living. These are not franchises. These are clubs that come from working class communities that have real roots, that are being torn up and torn out of the places that give them a sense of belonging. And this is what capitalism does to everything. It's doing it to football now. But the idea that something that's made by working people, that has a real purpose in a community, is reduced to a commodity whose only purpose is to make profit for the super rich. That is the story of capitalism. That is what it does. And that's what it's doing to football. And so this is something that we, when we have an audience of people who are genuinely interested in these clubs, who feel a deep sense of connection to them, that we've got to be saying as socialists, because this is a parable, a story of what's happening in the economy much more generally.
Yeah, no, it's been fascinating to watch the reaction. And Ronan, I want to get your take on, there was a series of tweets from a New Yorker writer named James Surowiecki, who is a longtime New Yorker writer, writes about finance and business. And he decided to weigh in on this creation of the European Sea Leagues. Like, look at all these fans of these teams, huh? They get real tribal when it comes to their teams. Like, nationalism really comes out the woodwork when they're thinking of, Liverpool should be for English people, for Liverpoolians, or Manchester United belongs to the people of Manchester. Screw the millions of Chinese people who love and breathe and die every single day Manchester United. That this is really just no different than the people who voted for Brexit, essentially. That there's these backward racist people who just don't like that their teams are now being supported by people from around the world. those fans' opinions don't matter. What is your response to that sort of line of attack? Which reminds me very specifically about a different issue, kind of like the free trade deal. Like, oh, don't you care about the workers in China?
It's NAFTA for football, right? It's all these bullshit liberal arguments that these people were trotting out back in the day over NAFTA, where they were trying to guilt people into not kicking up a fuss over the fact that these jobs were being lost, and the actual fabric of communities was being torn up in a way that it hasn't recovered for decades, and the sense of ownership that they had. I mean, this is the really interesting thing. You mentioned Brexit, right? And this is a big question. One of the slogans of Brexit, of the Leave campaign, was "Take back control." And this was framed by idiot liberals like that in a way of saying, oh, these people want to take back control, they're all racists, they just want to kick the immigrants out of their community. Right, okay, some people did. Actually, when you go to some of the places, Sunderland is a good example, another place with a big football club and a local base who've had a real difficult time of it in recent years. I went to Sunderland during the Brexit campaign, and I remember speaking to people, and it was, the conversations that you heard there about take back control were very compelling, because people would say, well, back in the day we had ship building and glass making, and we had a job that I could pass on to my kids, and we had some sense of ownership over the community, and we had a local Labour councillor who, if something went wrong in the area, I probably worked in the same industry as me, probably came from the same background as me. I had some sense of association and connection with that person, and some ability to be in control of my life. And now all of that is gone, and the big employers are supermarkets or retail or whatever the hell. My kids are in 0-hour contracts, they can't have decent jobs, there's no chance of me passing on anything in terms of the traditions that working people built up in this area to those kids. This is the same story. This is part of that same story. And the same neoliberal airheads who are happy to go on about how great this is for football were the same ones who were telling us all how great all of this stuff would be for our countries, and how everyone would just be able to get on board with modernize. So fans in Liverpool, you just modernize and support this international franchise that prices you out of your own stadium and makes a mockery of your values and the values of your club, and it's fine. And it's learn to code. You're a 50-year-old and you spent your life in an industrial job. Well, learn to code, get with the program, man. These people think they have a right to dictate the terms of our people's lives, our whole lives, and working class communities' lives to them, and they're patronizing morons.
Well, speaking of familiar arguments, the big bad of the European Super League, the sort of Emperor Palpatine, has been the president of Real Madrid, which, by the way, is technically fan-owned, and which, by the way, I am a technical part owner as a member of Real Madrid and season ticket holder. But the big bad is the president, the duly elected president of Real Madrid, Florentino Perez. And this has been his kind of baby for years. It's been his dream for years. I mean, everyone who watches Real Madrid has known that Florentino has been wanting to do this for a very long time. And he really has been one of the driving forces, if not the driving force, behind the creation of the European Super League. And last night, he went on El Chiringuito, which is the most watched sports television program in Spain. It's a hilarious program in many ways, but it is the most popular sports program in Spain. And he went on to defend the European Super League in arguments that are very, very familiar for those of us who remember the Reagan administration. Kale, would you play the clip of Florentino on El Chiringuito, if you have it?
Y ese dinero viene para todos, porque esto es una pirámide. Si los de arriba estamos y tenemos dinero, y no perdemos dinero, pues fluye hasta a todos, porque compramos jugadores, porque podemos ser solidarios, por todo lo que queramos. Pero si no se genera el dinero, no existe.
So this was in Spanish. I'll translate it. But if you saw his hand gestures, he said the word pirámide. That means pyramid. And he's saying, yeah, those of us at the top, we make all the money, and then it flows down. And he goes like that, and it flows down, and it trickles down to everyone else. That's how that works, you idiot. I was like, when I saw that clip, I could not believe the cynicism, the absolute contempt for everyone who thinks anyone would buy this line of bullshit that the big clubs would generate all this money and then it would just flow down like a pyramid. Oh, nothing wrong with pyramid structures in business. That's not like something that we should be absolutely worried about at all. No, I just thought that clip was absolutely hilarious.
I mean, it's exactly the same. The same stuff was put out in the Premier League statements. They were like, "What we're going to do is we're going to grow the pie." It's the same. It is like Milton Friedman on the pitch. That is what these clubs were. Is that we're going to grow the pie and we'll create a much bigger game. And then, despite the fact that all the smaller clubs and like the whole actual football pyramid in England, all the way down to the bottom, despite the fact they're all going to be locked out of this, they'll actually do better because there'll be more money on the table and they can have a bigger slice of it. It's absolute nonsense. It doesn't work that way. And what ends up happening, as we've seen in the economy for 30 and 40 years now, very, very clearly, is you get a concentration. And so earlier on, I was saying, football capitalism. I mean, it's arguably what we had was football capitalism. That's like the Premier League, Sky Sports, and La Liga with Florentino Perez and Joan Laporta and all these people. And now we've got like monopoly football capitalism is what they've been trying to make. That's where that's the next stage of this whole stupid development. But it rings true. The part of our problem here is what we can't do is allow just like the restoration of the old regime now.
Yeah.
That is not going to be a solution. And one of the real problems we have is that there is the risk that what this produces, and I think is a very high chance actually, that what this produces is a circling of the wagons around the existing kind of football order. The corruption of UEFA and FIFA, the profiteering of the Premier League.
Yeah, on that note, there was a super chat question that came in about that very issue, coming from Diego P. He says, some people are saying this is because the Champions League format needs to be revised. What changes would you guys make? I think I would expand that question to not just the Champions League, but what changes do you think football should make in order to become more sustainable and equitable?
Look, I'll go with the Champions League one directly because UEFA, who are now like presenting themselves as the great white knights of this situation, they announced yesterday their new format for the Champions League, which was just the Super League in slow motion. So all of these extra games, right? The huge amount of extra games, which means once again the domestic leagues get screwed, and you have this thing called historic coefficient.
This is a key thing to understand. This is a beautiful little innovation.
Basically says that your previous performances, so the fact that you were a big club who did well in the Champions League, year previous or whatever, would give you a buy into the next competition. Now that's just introducing the principle of the Super League that is going to be expanded. So UEFA's own idiot proposals are just going to put the seed of a Super League, and obviously we said there's a continuity here, but there's a specific aspect of the Super League, which is the idea that you don't qualify, that you're in there by right, basically by virtue of your wealth. And what they're going to do, because they know that the coefficients at the moment rank these big clubs. So like, you're talking about Liverpool, Bayern Munich, Paris Saint-Germain.
Who would not qualify for next year's Champions League as of right now.
Liverpool would not, no. But they are very high in the coefficient because they won it a couple of years ago and they were in the final the year before that. And so like their coefficient is really high. And so what they're trying to do is create a system where these people can then get a buy into it. So this is what I mean. You cannot have a restoration of that old regime and expect football to do anything other than produce something like a European Super League again in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. I mean, they've taken a blow now, but a lot of the principles of this tournament are already the things that these same owners, by the way, in addition to Bayern Munich and Paris Saint-Germain and clubs who didn't join the Super League, have been negotiating with the UEFA authorities over the Champions League for the last while to try to ring-fence the money, which is another big part of this, to try to produce kind of more games at an elite level and to diminish the domestic leagues and to try and have the principle of people having buys into it. So, I mean, if we're looking for FIFA and UEFA to save us, then we are lost. These are not only like behemoths of corporate football, they are ludicrously, hilariously, farcically corrupt organizations, which have absolutely no interest in like preserving the position of the fans. Nor, by the way, does the Premier League and Sky Sports and all of these things. And so there has to be, something more fundamental at this point. And my view on that is that there has to be a division. We have to say that there are these different spirits within football. That there is, on the one hand, corporate football, which is about a small number of teams, a game produced for TV audiences, owned by billionaires who are trying to milk as much money out of it as they possibly can. Sterile atmospheres in the stadium, no sense of tradition and heritage and connection to the working class communities that produce them, versus fan football. And that is like the point of unity at the begin for all of this is like justifiable contempt for all of the authorities at the top of world football, which fans now pretty much have. Not just saying, oh, the Super League is terrible, but you know who's great? Like all the people who, you know, gave the Super League the open door to let it happen. You have to say that fan football is different. Fan football is something that's going to have a special place for the stadium. It's going to have a special place for, you know, the stands and fan culture, and is going to have a sense of the connection with the working class roots of the clubs and with the communities that sustained them and that built them. That is going to have, you know, ticket prices that reflect that, so people can get into the ground. It's not going to be based on ripping off people year in, year out in terms of the merchandising game. And in my view, that's going to have fan ownership. A movement for fan ownership in the game. You pointed out it's not a panacea. I think that's exactly correct. It's very important that we say that, you know, fan ownership can mean a lot of things, but it's a pretty good start. Yeah. Without it, you have no accountability, and the door is always open to the franchise model. With it, even in situations where it's being weakened, like in Germany right now, which Germany has the Bundesliga has a rule where 50% plus one of all of the clubs are owned by fans. And you might say, well, Germany has had one team win it forever, 9 years, I think, and it has RB Leipzig coming in and distorting the model. All of that is true, and it's not a perfect system. But you know what? There weren't any German clubs in the list of the European Super League. And you ask a German football fan about their system, a system I think is in other countries as well. I think Sweden has a similar system and so on. You ask them about their system, and what they'll tell you is they would not swap it. Because it's, you know, the stadiums are built for the fans. If you've ever looked at German football,
have you ever been to a game in Germany?
Yeah, I have. I was at the West.
It's just great experience. It's just an amazing. Just the whole thing is incredible. You know, they and the teams are at least from what I know in Spain. Which are the teams are just increasingly more and more hermetic and shut out from the fans. Like they're remarkably open to the fans. Like when Bayern Munich travel to play in some Champions League game, they actually host events for the traveling fans. The players come out and like drink beer with the fans after the game. Like they have to and hang out with them, and it really creates a sense of communion between the team and the fans, and that's what it comes from, that kind of ownership model. I mean, it's kind of an amazing thing.
And so it should be. Like, you know, football was created as a way for people to escape the alienation they felt in their working lives, Monday to Friday. That was, you know, and beyond actually in its origins. But that was the idea of it. It was an escape from that kind of alienation.
Yeah.
Who the hell wants to be further alienated within this game, this cultural pursuit that has been created in order to give people some sense of communion, belonging, some sense of ownership over a part of their life, and that's what so, you know, desperately needs to be retained.
You know, it's funny. We talk about the commodification of everything under capitalism, and how that ultimately destroys the thing that it's meant to, you know, kind of save or whatever. And in this moment of the Super League made me think about that a lot, because essentially what they want to turn the sport into is an entertainment product, like just indistinguishable from something like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you know, in which, you know, there's games that happen and there's just kind of a steady stream of content and things like that. But that's not why people love the sport. It's part of it, but it's not fully it. It's like what you talk about, like that there's a reason why people are obsessed and watch and go and suffer with teams that lose a lot. They lose all the time, but they go and they suffer with them. That's not fun. That's not entertainment in any way. It's not the same way you sit back and like let a Marvel movie wash over you, even though they're all kind of the same exact thing. It's something else. It's something else, and that's kind of the bleeding pulse of it. If you turn it into a pure entertainment product, then in a way you are competing with all the other pure nonsense entertainment products we have, whether it's Marvel or your fucking Instagram feed. It's different. The sort of the ties to your team, the stadium, the fan experience, the suffering with your team, the collective suffering that comes from being a supporter and being in it with your friends and your family and your mates and all that stuff. It's something else, and capitalism can't process that in its logic. It can't harness that. It's funny here in the United States, MLS has been pretty successful recently in, I would say, cosplaying that kind of thing, where the clubs have already very, very self-consciously been fomenting this kind of fan culture and community thing, and the stadium experience is very good and all that thing. But it seems like they're kind of manufacturing it. Like it seems kind of fake on some level, although people are very big fans of it and things like that here. But it's different. It's different from pure entertainment, and something like the European Super League, this creation of this kind of closed thing. It just, that's what it is. It's the Marvel Cinematic Universe in which you get your steady stream of content, and
let's say something about that as well. You know what I mean? I think for socialists to be able to engage in these things, we've got to be aware that there's going to be a broad range of like cultural pursuits and interests, and it's always a mistake for socialists to try and narrow down the sphere of the movements that we build to such a way that like you're prescribing in the sphere of culture. This is a debate that goes into areas like film, and the fact that there can be actually different traditions within film as well. Just as there could be two spirits within football, be two spirits within film. There can be the spirit of the film club. There can be the spirit of local theatre. There can be the spirit of kind of the small scale film productions with the political impacts that they've had over very many decades. And so what we are finding is in all spheres of our lives, we're at war against the system, against the capitalist system, and to try to reclaim dignity and some degree of human experience from a system that wants to grind every aspect of every part of our lives, from the moment we wake up to the moment we sleep, into a commodified experience to make profit for a tiny minority of people who own the world economy. And football is a part of that. I want to read something from a late great Uruguayan journalist Eduardo Galeano, who wrote The Open Veins of Latin America, but was also, I think, kind of less known, maybe amongst the left, a fantastic football journalist. And he talked at one stage about the German theologian Dorothy Sulla putting the question to him, how would you explain to a child what happiness is? He says, I wouldn't explain it. This is what the German theologian said. I wouldn't explain it. I'd toss him a ball and let him play. And Galeano's analysis of this was professional football does everything to castrate that energy of happiness, but it survives. And maybe that's why football never stops being astonishing. As a friend says, that's the best thing about it. Its stubborn capacity for surprise. The more the technocrats program it down to the smallest detail, the more the powerful manipulate it. Football continues to be the art of the unforeseeable. When you least expect it, the impossible occurs. The dwarf teaches the giant a lesson. And that is actually a fundamental a question for the whole cultural and sporting sphere. But it's one of the reasons why in this area, with the particularities of football as a working class game, built by working class people, sustained by their communities, and now stolen by an elite who want to use it purely to produce a profit, there is such a resonance between the movements that we need to build. And there's such an opportunity over the question of fan movements. Fan movements that, really will give lie to these people who say, oh, keep politics out of sport. Where the hell are those people today? Keep politics out of sport. We've seen, the protests that there's been outside Leeds ground yesterday in Ellen Road and outside Chelsea's ground today. And we've seen the kind of huge campaign that was built in the space of just 2 days against the European Super League. And we need to talk about politics in sport more often. The politics of, clubs getting away and their fan bases as well. And this is the difficulty of fan movements. You can't be uncritical. You've got to realize the contradictions that exist within them. Getting away with, instances of horrendous racism on the pitch, where you've ended up with impunity time after time because of these same authorities in UEFA and in FIFA who now want us to celebrate them as the champions of the game. Politics runs right the way through this game. At the bottom line, at its heart and its soul, it is ours. It is a working class game, and a game actually whose greatest people, whose greatest characters and stars were socialists. In England, you think of Alex Ferguson, who's a socialist. Bill Shankly was a socialist. Brian Clough was a socialist. And these were people who spoke about their philosophies of management of football and the game being based on their socialist idea of the importance of collective action. We think of the late great Diego Maradona. And why did we love him? Why was there such an outpouring? Well, because he seemed, in the way that he played the game, to understand its essence, even amidst the madness of his life and the complete chaos going on around him, a lot of which, by the way, was fueled by the money in the game at that stage, which often chews up and spits out young people from poor backgrounds who aren't able and experienced enough when they're going into it to be able to understand, to ground themselves into this like new life of celebrity and stardom. And a lot of that, happened with Maradona. And yet, when he was on the pitch, he understood it. He understood the nature of the connection with the fans. He understood that football is not at its essence the business. Football at its essence is more like a religion, a spiritual commodity. It's more like something that is produced by people outside of the immediate and the rational and so on. It is something about the human experience. And those players who've understood that have tended to be with us, people of the left, people who had connections with the class, the real people's champs.
Yeah, as late as 1997, when Robbie Fowler scored a goal and took off his shirt and had showed his support for the dock worker strike in Liverpool. You mentioned Maradona. There's that remarkable moment in the Maradona documentary by Asif Kapadia where they win the league for the first time, and everyone wants to talk to Maradona, and he brushes off all the interviewers and goes to hug his teammate Ciro Ferrara, who is from Napoli, who was a local boy from Napoli, had grown up, suffered with the team as they for decades had never won anything, and this was announced, and he got to realize his dream of playing for his local club and actually helping them to the title. And Maradona, that was his first instinct, was to go to him. He did understand that element of it in his bones, in a way. It was I'll never forget that, watching that moment in the documentary.
And listen, if you ever wanted to have any sense of what football meant to a people, you walk the streets of Naples, and it is mural after mural, and this is before he died, of Diego Maradona. Somebody who I remember the quote that was in the press, that we might not have money, we might not have jobs, we might not have housing, we might not have healthcare, but we have Diego Maradona. That was the Naples press when he arrived, and the sense of that again. This is what it was. It was. Without getting into what Marx wrote about religion, I mean, I think that the similarities are very much the same. They're very much potent in this instance. This was the expression that people gave to the what the life that they aspired towards, the glory, the achievement, and so on, that was repressed by other aspects of the world we lived in, and particularly by the working life. And it was, some people would say, well, that for a socialist makes it a distraction, that for a socialist makes it something that deflects from the struggle. No, what it did is it created bonds among working class people that generated the kind of solidarity that was possible to produce then at a later stage through like the fan organizations, the basis of support for organized action, for strikes and the trade unions and so forth, these things were connected. I think it's very important for those of us on the left to have an appreciation of the importance for people to have an escape. If we're talking about the misery of this economy that we're all trapped in and have to live in, that people should have an escape from it, and that we should then fight in that sphere as well, the cultural sphere, the sporting sphere, for those qualities.
Well, I don't know about you, but the past couple of days have been an escape for me, because when I woke Monday, I felt an unbelievable sense of resignation. That these just powerful forces way beyond our control, or even not even, I don't want to say even control, like even like they don't even realize we exist, kind of thing. We're just destroying the sport that I grew up with and loved. But then today, I had so much fun as I watched the whole thing burn down minute by minute. It was remarkable. There was a couple funny tweets from some of the sort of middle class teams around Europe, and we call them middle class now. They used to be, some of them used to be really big teams. There was Sevilla, which has won 5 Europa Leagues in recent years. Tweeted this one out today. That was a good one. They were not in the Super League, despite the fact that they've won 5 Europa Leagues. Ajax, who is one of the, like you mentioned, one of the greatest teams in the history of Europe. As late as the mid '90s, they were making Champions League finals. Kale, do you have Ajax's tweet or no? Come on, producer Kale, what the hell are you doing? There it is. Yeah, Ron Burgundy. That escalated quickly. You love to see it. Ronan, how did you feel yesterday, and how do you feel today?
It's interesting. Like when you talk about the Ajax question, it's one of those issues when I was talking about before, where we can't just go back to where it was, to the status quo in football. I was thinking yesterday about, yes, on the one hand, how bad the European Super League was, but how ridiculous it had become, this whole game, that a great club like Ajax, right, who had produced not only some of the greatest teams in the history of the sport, but also the whole philosophy that dominated parts of the game, the Cruyff total football philosophy, that we had created a game that for a good chunk of this century had forced them to sell their best players to also ran clubs in other leagues, just purely on the basis that they had better TV shares. What kind of an upturning of the natural order of the game was that? And you can't go back, because everyone's going to have different teams they remember from different generations. There's no point in going back and saying, well, we're going to reset it to some idealized point in the past. What I think is, you go forward now, and you say, this is a moment that it is a line in the sand. What happened with the European Super League was not just a phenomenon of the European Super League. It was a phenomenon of football, and a sign of the deep rot in the game more generally. And you build movements and a fan culture which is against the authorities that run the game, and against the corporate and capitalist takeover of the game, and these big owners. And you fight with those movements to try to democratize the game.
Yeah,
there are some really important points to that. They're really important, demands. One of which is fan ownership. You spoke about this, and fan ownership is not a panacea. That's absolutely true. Barcelona and Real Madrid are good examples of this. But the question then is, well, what is meaningful fan ownership? I mean, everyone who has ever participated in an election is aware of the limits that can be placed on your ability to influence outcomes, certainly in American elections, but in across Europe as well. that having an election doesn't mean you have a democratic society. Well, it's much the same in Barcelona and Real Madrid, choosing between one buffoonish
Billionaires.
One buffoonish figure from the Madrid corporate elite, or another buffoonish figure from the Catalan corporate elite, for these various clubs. And that is really what the fan ownership means. You get to participate in this pageant every few years where ludicrous promises are made by morons in order to justify the plans for these clubs. That is not real and meaningful ownership. What is a model that gives you, at the very bare minimum, some of the powers of the German system, which is it offers a break, so you can have accountability and prevent some of the worst things happening, even as you don't control the game. That is a real start. And so you've had big fan movements in Germany, which have been able to change aspects of the game around ticket pricing, around merchandising, around scheduling. The key thing, like when the kickoffs are happening, because if TV is allowed to determine it, the kickoffs are happening at nonsense o'clock in the morning, and no one can get to the games. So what they've managed to do in Germany is to create movements that have fought for much better and more fan-friendly scheduling, and they were able to achieve those things because the 50% plus one meant that they had some degree of influence, even if they're not in day-to-day control. But there's also much better outcomes we can imagine of fan ownership. We can imagine fan ownership that is, totally fan-owned clubs, not only owned, but that are actually democratized, where you've got real input and where they generate, a kind of culture around them, where they are part of their communities, where, they are an institution that is a part of their community, in the same way as we would aspire for a union to be part of your workplace, your democratic representation at work. Well, you've got these clubs that operate outside in your community that are tied into community initiatives, and that can happen. I think Bohemians, obviously, I'm going to big them up, and Dan Lambert and the crowd running the club there, and the great work that they've done, which is a club from 5 minutes up the road from where I grew up in Dublin, and that their fan ownership model had difficulties. I've interviewed Dan just today. We're doing a series of pieces on fan ownership in football and Tribune, and I interviewed him on it, and he said, well, fan ownership during the period of Ireland's economic boom reflected kind of the attitudes at that time, where fans were demanding more and more money being spent, unsustainable models, kind of commercialization and so on. And it didn't, it led Bohemians into real trouble, to the point where Bohemians had to be saved. But it was saved, and it was able to be saved because it was a fan-owned club. And then they've turned it around, and you've got, in the last few years, a 400% increase in revenue, and you've had a massive increase in turnout at the games and so on as well. And they've been able to do that, doubling of the attendances and whatever, and selling out of games and all of that. They've been able to do it despite one of the longest barren periods in Bow's history over in terms of trophies. It speaks to the fact that actually, Barca has that phrase about more than a club. Well, fan clubs actually are. They actually are, and they actually are more than just the result on the pitch. Yes, the result on the pitch matters, but they're more than that. You can have this growth of a club and enthusiasm around it, and a culture that's generated, and a connection that people can have with the club through these through this fan ownership, which means that the club can continue to have success that isn't just like success on the pitch. Because football is about more than that. And the great figures, we talk about Bielsa and so on, I often think of these guys in these moments, because Bielsa could right now be managing any team, elite team, really. He would want, and he's always chosen these charismatic smaller teams where often the results are mixed, and there's been and I remember when he had the great golden generation in Chile as well, playing the kind of football he did, the wild high wire act football, do some great things for Chile, but it was not the most efficient or the most effective or the most methodological, but it had a sense of people's dreams being on the pitch. You had a sense of the way football should be, that it isn't, as you say, it's not just a business, and it can't just be reduced to that. It is that kid who picks up the ball and the aspirations they have when they do it, and the best people do understand it. With Bow's what it's meant is really good and progressive initiatives. As an example, where they've, last year, the away kit, refugees welcome across the front of it, which followed on the back of having, done really, really good work with, as a club with immigrant rights groups, and having done things like showing the African Cup of Nations in the stadium and trying to link with the local migrant communities. Followed on from the club supporting gay rights and the gay marriage referendum back in 2015. Now the club has its away shirt sponsored by Fontaine's, the band, but that's part of a campaign against homelessness in the city. You can actually imbue your club with more meaning when you've got a degree of fan ownership that's meaningful and real. And it's going to be different in different layers. I know that there are questions coming in about, what does it look like? There are examples in England, like there are numerous different examples, and in Britain in general. You've got the difference between, say, an AFC Wimbledon. It's a good example of this club that saved itself, fans that saved the club, basically, that was being torn out of the place in London that it was from, sent out to Milton Keynes, a new club made of it, like the franchise model. They set up their own ones, and they're now in the same league as that club after many years. They're now in the same league as that club.
It's an incredible story. It's an incredible story. Yeah.
Fantastic story, but the only ones Exeter City are found. FC United up in Manchester, which was founded out of the protest movement against the Glazers. Up in Scotland, you've got Motherwell, a top level team, top league team, who are fan owned, and you've got these initiatives trying to do it in other clubs, supporters, trusts, and other clubs throughout the leagues. We interviewed one today in Newcastle. Of fans who, obviously hate their owner, Mike Ashley, and have mounted campaigns for a long time. Now, they're not naive. They don't think we're going to be able to raise the huge amounts to buy a Premier League club now. But what they do say is that we're going to be able to raise enough, we hope, to buy in and to start the culture of fan ownership. And it'll be partial fan ownership and then fan accountability. And then a crisis comes and we might be able to buy our club down the line. And at the bottom line of it is, if ever a crisis comes, the club won't go to the wall because we'll have come up with some kind of a fund that will be able to support it through difficult times. And that's what we need. We need a movement that demands change, like legislative change, and change to the rules of the game. And the 50+1 rule would be a good start. And then we need fan movements from below that are fighting at each and every point to take ownership of the game.
Well, Ronan, I think before we wrap up, I wanted to. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about this, because I think it's an important thing to understand in the context of this story, right? I mean, the European Super League seems to have come and gone. It seems to have been defeated, at least for now. But something like it could happen in the future. I think people should be very watchful of it. But I wanted to ask you about the creation of the Premier League, because the English Premier League has become incredibly popular here in the United States. I don't know that people really understand its origins, because it was very similar. The creation of the Premier League in the early 90s was very similar to this attempt to create the European Super League. And can you explain what happened? What was the creation of the Premier League? And what was the role of Rupert Murdoch?
Yeah, the Premier League was created as a breakaway from the Football League. And it was done because there was an argument that the English game had potential, which was true commercially, and that there needed to be a separate entity for the elite clubs who could work with broadcast television on producing a product. And that was the origins of the Premier League, that it broke away from the Football League, and you got, in I think 1992 was the first season, and you got this Sky Sports generated product, which was fueled by the money of Rupert Murdoch. And that is the origins of that kind of wave of football capitalism. But it's very important to remember with all of these things, like, what were they selling? Why is the Premier League popular? Is it just popular because it's the best players? Well, actually, no.
They definitely don't have the best players.
True as well, right?
Now they probably do, but not at the time.
Well, yeah, for a long time they didn't, and for the time of its rise in popularity. But even now, they didn't win the Champions League last year, and more often than not, English clubs don't win the Champions League. Liverpool was kind of an exception in that respect recently.
They finally started hiring foreign managers, dude. That's what happened.
Yeah. Well, that's certainly true.
From the continent.
There's a whole conversation to be had about the culture and philosophy of the game too, in terms of tactics and so on. But you know what it was? I mean, they sold the fan culture. When you think of
Yeah.
like Liverpool, what did they sell about Liverpool in the Premier League?
You'll never walk alone. That's why people here love them.
They sold the cop. They sold the passion of the fans. Well, even with Manchester
The
United,
amount of "You'll never walk alone" tattoos I see in Los Angeles will shock you.
I know
Tattoos.
Yeah. And that's it. You're selling the ethos. You're selling the fans. You're selling their passion. That is what they commodified to sell. And actually, it goes through. Marcus Rashford put up the tweet today, right, when he was, and fair play to him, really interesting guy, where he put up that tweet, Matt Busby's quote about, football without fans is nothing. And why did they have football without fans nothing up in that stadium? Well, it's part of their whole attempt to generate a kind of image around Manchester United as a club on the same basis. Arsenal has always sold that. They did a big thing recently on David Rocastle, a player who very sadly passed away quite young, and that Arsenal should never forget who they are and where they come from, and the idea of a club that's connected to this part of North London. They sold the fan connection, the experience in the stadium, the passion that people had, and they had that passion because of where the game had come from. Because it was something that people had a sense of ownership over. It was passed on generation to generation. They felt a sense of belonging in the stadium. The singing, the chants, all came from this. And that's what they packaged up and turned into a commodity and sold to the world. And actually, you know what? It wasn't even just that. And they sold all aspects. They went through even the difficult. We talk about like English football, and people talk now about how great it is compared to the 80s and the difficulties in the stands. But they even sold that. They created movies like The Football Factory.
Yeah.
They sold like hooliganism. They sold
Green Street Hooligans, dude. Yeah,
exactly. They sold literally every part of the game and that was created by the fans, including all of the problematic elements, into the international market. That was their aim. And the point is, they don't have that commodity without the working class communities that built that club. And so these people have a special right now to take it back.
Yeah. Well, I think that's as good a place as any to end it. Ronan, thank you so much for this emergency stream with all the breaking news. I'm sure we even missed breaking news as we were doing the stream. I've been getting texts from all my friends. I think AC Milan's already announced they're exiting the Super League. Again, I think it's just a moment to taste a little bit of, I mean, maybe a little Schadenfreude, taste a little moment of like, we were upset, we did something about it, and we blocked this thing, at least for now.
A moment of possibility.
Moment of possibility. I was incredibly depressed yesterday, and I have a big smile on my face today, not just because I get to speak to you. Always a pleasure.
You too, Nando. And thanks for everyone watching.